I listened to your episode from about a month ago. You were on Tim Pool's show, which I love him. I watch him as much as I can because I just feel like it's a source of sanity in my life. And you said political warfare is the most important concept that you've never heard of. And I think it's so important because I think it's just eluded so many people. And first, I'm wondering where it came from, because it seems like it was all of a sudden 100% here. Like, or maybe I wasn't paying attention. I feel like a lot of us weren't paying attention, and I really loved the way that you explained it. That it's basically through this mid-level. The political left will use this mid-level violence, and I loved your example of like the poking until you can't take it anymore, and then they're just looking for a reaction. And I'm listening to you describe it, and I'm like, I know this might make me sound like anti-woman or whatever, but it sounds like this is like basically manipulation, almost like it's like when you think of a crazy ex-girlfriend or like a crazy girl that you're dating, just because I've heard so many stories, and who knows, maybe I've been that girl myself. It almost sounds like this is a crazy, manipulative, almost like female way of relating and domination. It almost is like, is this an answer to what people think is the more male, like the patriarchy, American values, conservatism? I started to make that comparison, and I was wondering what you thought.
Well, I mean, there's various aspects. Political warfare takes a lot of different forms. Propaganda is the most kind of obvious. There is also these kind of provocation type things like the mid-level violence. But you are definitely correct that with whatever's going on with this crazy movement, that there is some kind of noxious female energy kind of vibe around what's going on. I don't know if you know Jordan Peterson. I think everybody knows Jordan Peterson. I recently saw him talking to somebody, and it was really profound the way that he talked about it, because what he said was one of the things that the internet has provided is he starts talking about how he was on the Trigonometry podcast, and he was talking about how male violence operational, or violence in general, or aggression operationalized in certain ways, and that the ways that we might operationalize it we usually associate with kind of male bullying or fist fighting or, guns and extortion rackets and all kinds of things. And that, he says, doesn't upload onto the internet very well. Whereas female violence or aggression is this kind of social murder, this reputational undercutting, this subversion, the kind of, like you said, the crazy ex-girlfriend stuff, or even crazy current girlfriend stuff. It depends on the girl. He said that actually uploads onto the internet shockingly well. And I would add to his analysis, which is correct, that so do personality disorders. And personality disorders not only upload on the internet very well, they're very easy to hide behind avatars. Like, if you're a normal everyday person, you just assume whoever you're talking to on social media is probably also a normal everyday person. Probably you're not assuming that, they have borderline personality, or they have schizoid personality, or they have some narcissistic or other histrionic or something going on. And so the kind of aggression that follows personality disorders also uploads to social media extremely well. And Peterson's point, obviously, is as a society, we were not prepared for how effectively these kinds of like reputational destructions and psychological manipulations and gaslighting and things would transfer into the digital communication realm. And it's really an important thing, because this opened a door to political warfare, not only that we weren't prepared for, but also that could be taking place on a global scale. Like, we talked about Russian bot farms for like 4 years with Blue Anon, and now Wumao is the Chinese version of that, and they're certainly active. Usually you can kind of tell when Wumao's up to something because their English isn't great, which is slightly hilarious, but their style of insult, once you're familiar with Chinese manner, is pretty obvious. But I mean, that's the CCP doing psychological warfare on Twitter, which they block in their own country, with people all over the world. So now we have a global network of the ability to wage psychological warfare behind avatars in a circumstance where certain forms of abuse psychological abuse upload really, really well. Then we've got people like CNN, of course, just going full blast with their propaganda war. We're in the midst of more current, peaceful protests, as it said. So, what is it? Peaceful protests intensify. Antifa. This was a real CNN Chiron, whatever. Last January, it was something like Antifa seeks peace through violence. Like, that was really something they put on television. This is psychological manipulation, is what this is.
And you also have our very powerful social media, like influencers or recording artists. Like, I'll never forget, and this was not even that long ago, Cardi B she tweeted like, "Oh, it's okay to choose violence," or something like, "I woke up today and chose violence." And I'm just like, I don't know. Once you start putting together the pieces, you're like, how could she not be totally a total puppet? How could she not be totally paid to spread certain messages, because they almost seem to link together a little too well? And I thought that's so interesting what you said about the CCP, like their style of, I guess, like Twitter trolling, I guess. I don't know if you called it Wu Mao, but
Wu Mao.
And so I think, and that's fascinating. I've never heard anybody mention that, and you've been there. How would you describe the way, like, Chinese people basically they're making fun of Americans, or they're like, how would you describe their sense of humor or their
for a while
style?
They were, but it's like there were these Chinese state affiliated accounts that have like the little flag thing stuck on there. It says Chinese government affiliated account on Twitter, for example. And they'll say things like, now they'll just say something will happen, and they'll tweet, "America has to fix its systemic racism problem." But, it's like this really awkward sentence that people wouldn't normally use, in English. I didn't do a good job of rendering it into Chinese.
So it's like more grammatical. It's
grammatical. It's syntactical. Yeah. You kind of pick up on it. You're like, that's not how they talk, and there's been some cartoons that they put out that you see, and that they're really just over the top obvious with what they're trying to do. Like, the subtlety's not quite there. So, I mean, I don't have
and it's like everyone was thought. Yeah, no, I just remember, like, when Trump was in office, everyone was like, "Oh, Russian bots," and now it seems like I'm like, "Oh wow, of course!" Like, it's so insidious. There's like Chinese bots. Like, I don't know. It's kind of scary. I feel like my sister, who's a history teacher, should have warned me about all this. But
well, that's a thing. We have been pretty, in our education system, we've been pretty systematically left in the dark. I didn't even know what communism was till I was in college. Like, I'd heard it, obviously, but I didn't learn anything about it till I was in college. Like, how in the world can literally the driving force of the majority of 20th century politics have been left out of the entire curriculum in the 1980s and 1990s for somebody, even then? How in the world could that have been completely left out of the curriculum? I mean, I remember going to college and us having arguments, what's the difference between communism and socialism? Because we had no idea, because nobody had ever covered any of this in a single history class or anything else. And a lot of people I don't know how much directly this is the case, but a lot of people don't realize that these radical left activists more or less had taken over colleges of education and a lot of curriculum writing by the early 1980s. Like, the guys like Bill Ayers out of the Weatherman Underground, literal terrorist, became, when he realized he wasn't going to accomplish anything by terrorism, do you know what he became? K through 12 education activist.
Oh my God.
Angela Davis, who was a literal terrorist, who is the driving inspiration and the link between the crazy neo-Marxist radicalism of the 60s and the woke movement of today in a very real way, and who's still a very active agitator and activist today. Guess what she did whenever she got, finally got it kind of out of prison and all of the trouble in the 1970s? Became a major K through 12 education activist. So they started writing out the harms of communism out of our education. Everybody pointed the finger at, like, oh, the Texas Board of Education is like putting in all of this crazy pro-America garbage. That's bad. That's imperialist, that's Americanism, that's, conservative or whatever.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, they were systematically writing out the fact that, hundreds of millions of people died under their stupid program, to where nobody, virtually no high school graduate in the United States in probably the last 20 years had a comprehensive education about communism whatsoever, or the fact that it fails every single time it's tried.